There are a lot of companies which will unfortunately fail. Launch 22 is definitely at risk of being one of those. We're a traditional bricks and mortar business at our core business model. Is it okay if I drink some tea whilst we're talking?
This is perfectly fine. I wish I had some fresh tea. Mine's just cold now. So let me first introduce you to people who do not know you, although I think many people do in the London startup ecosystem. I think you're an influential figure. Tom is running Launch 22. Launch 22 is, I'm one of the mentors there, but other than that, I'm just a fan because in terms of bringing people from different backgrounds and genuinely building a culture where people are helpful to each other, it's not very easy to do. And I think you and the team, including Fede and everybody else, I think you have accomplished that. So I always admire the community there. But now we are going through a crisis, a series of crises in a way. And one of them is the COVID situation. And it has been affecting London's startups in direct and indirect ways. And I'm trying to understand that. And so every operation, including startups of London's operation, we have to approach it in a different light now. There are new challenges and there are new opportunities. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask a few questions to you to understand the ecosystem, the changes it's going through, the challenges it's having, because you're working with startups, working with founders, have the chance to observe them and have a macro perspective in a way. So like my first question is, in your observation, how are startups handling this work from home situation? Do you think they can adapt to that? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
It is a good question. So I've been kind of playing catch up almost, as it were. I was recently caught up on holiday at the perfect timing that all this was happening. So I spent the majority of my holiday trying to figure out a way back to the UK. But I made it back, so I'm here and have been for the last 4 or 5 days now. But yeah, so I've just been kind of busy getting back into things and kind of adapting myself to what has been such an aggressive change in the way that companies are working. And in answer to your question, there are a lot of companies which, will unfortunately fail. Launch 22 is definitely at risk of being one of those. We're a traditional bricks and mortar business at our core business model. Not saying that we can't kind of also adapt and change, but our revenues are taking a big hit. I think a lot of companies at the same time, though, due to the nature of them being startups, kind of are adaptable. And I think you'll see lots of businesses changing, adapting, and creating kind of very innovative ways to survive and actually to thrive. I think Simon Sinek also had a very good points on this, being that in times of crises are actually kind of opportunities as well. And so there's plenty of interesting things that a lot of businesses are doing at the moment, not just kind of in the bigger scale, but also for kind of smaller sizes. Leon, for example, are a great example. They have completely transformed the way that their business is operating at the moment, from being a restaurant kind of takeout place where you go in and you order a meal and you'd sit in and eat it. They've now transformed into kind of quick, fast takeout operations. So they've managed to keep their employees, and if anything, are doing a massive service to the rest of the country. So I'm sure you'll see lots more of that happening, which is really positive. But like, there's no sugarcoating the fact that a lot of businesses will fail. And it's very much down to the leaders of those organizations. If they just kind of sit back and kind of roll over and take it, then that what will be. But it's the kind of the businesses that actually sit up and look at the opportunities they have around them, see how they can adapt their model, how they can pivot, which will see them kind of thrive in the future and make them more resilient as well long term.
I mean, startups are a high risk, high reward type of a game compared to working in very large organizations. So I think that theme is still apparent here. They are much more vulnerable in times of crises like this, but at the same time, they're more agile and they can change direction overnight if
Yeah.
founders and key people in the team decide that it's the right direction to go to. But I mean, I appreciate your point. With some businesses, the room for maneuverability is bigger than others. So if you're a brick and mortar business, like as in the case of WeWork or other places that actually have built a business on bringing people physically together, it is much more difficult. It's a very difficult question how we can pivot from that. Of course, there are advantages that the new spaces that have opened up, but I appreciate your point. It's a big challenge. Um, so another area I think where big companies and small companies differ is, going back to the original question, is how they manage the working from home situation. Some are able to manage that better in a more productive way, and not just business productivity, but in a way that can actually protect the culture and how people get along. And some companies have challenges with that. Some are very productive, but people feel detached from the company now. They don't
Yeah.
feel a part of the organization. They just do their work, send their thing, and then it's a very isolated
Yeah.
situation for many people. Um, so both because you have established a really great community in Launch 22 and because you're observing different startups, different founders, what were your observations regarding what works in terms of creating a good remote working culture versus which companies, which founders, or which cases struggle and are not able to be really productive or have a good culture at this stage?
Yeah. So I mean, it all stems from the leadership completely. In my opinion, it all stems down from the leadership. And if the leaders in the organization take up that mantle and take on the responsibility of galvanizing the team, then I see this as an opportunity to actually bring teams closer together. In times of hardship, there's kind of like a common enemy, which is, coronavirus. And if you can kind of actually use that to galvanize your team to kind of to work towards that, to beating that, then that actually, I think, if anything, can make your culture stronger and more resilient. Again, I mean, working remotely as a team, we're trying that at the moment. So I literally just got off a call with my community managers today, and if anything, the last couple of days we've had kind of more productive and more interesting conversations than we had the week before this all started happening.
Is there any ideas you could openly share in terms of what new potential ways, opportunities you're observing?
Yeah, so I mean, I can be completely transparent about where
Yeah,
we're at.
please. I mean, I'd appreciate that.
We have two locations. One they're both London-based kind of co-working style spaces.
King's Cross and Poplar, right?
Yeah, Poplar and King's Cross, and our revenues have taken a big hit. I mean, we probably lost in the last week and a bit, or potentially are losing when contracts expire up to 50-60% of our revenue monthly. So
that's a big hit.
That's a big hit. And as a business that has overheads, we have physical space to manage and maintain. Our margins are very tight, and also as a kind of non-profit charity, it's even more so. So we've had to really think, and are still thinking quite kind of creatively as much as we can, and how we can actually kind of lower that risk. So in terms of mitigating the impacts, what we're doing is preserving our kind of our overheads. So kind of we're being forced to cancel certain kind of contracts and and monthly kind of subscriptions.
Hmm.
So that's going to lower our monthly kind of costs. On the other side, we're thinking more creatively about how we can actually keep our members, keep them happy and provide a service at this time. And one thing which we're toying around with at the moment, which we haven't kind of fully launched yet, but it's the idea about actually kind of offering a more virtual membership. So that's taking the other assets which we have, which are, things like our mentors, for example, such as yourself, and seeing whether the mentors would be open to kind of providing that mentorship virtually still, just like they've been doing kind of in person, but then actually seeing if we can offer the members which are currently here kind of a more virtual offering, in so much as they can kind of access the mentors still, and they can access kind of their virtual kind of registered address, but not be paying the full price. And that way we'll be able to keep members. We'll be able to kind of keep that community going, because that's going to be really hard to do. Like, if we were running a physical space, the community is centered around that location. We have got the presence online, but it's kind of how can we kind of keep that going? And so we're looking at things like that. So that's what we're going to be hopefully rolling out over the next couple of weeks.
I remember I think it was the founder of Slack who said it. It's really important how you define your business. I mean, it goes with the why question as well. But I think he was saying Slack is not a messaging business. We are a solution to X, Y, and Z in a more broader way. So I think, and that stuck with me in every business that I've been in. So at this situation, considering the L22 case, for example, one way to narrowly identify yourself would be via a co-working space or an incubator, which brings people physically together. But a broader, potentially a more lucrative definition at this situation would be we are essentially about helping younger entrepreneurs meet with more tenured ones. So I like that thread of thinking, and I think it's really useful for a lot of businesses. It doesn't solve all the problems. It is still very difficult. But if there is an opportunity, the opportunity lies in actually defining yourself and what your business is more broadly. You're not a messaging app. You are something bigger, and there might be different ways to do that. I don't know if you agree with that.
No, completely. I mean, like when we first set up, Launch 22, our original vision was to support entrepreneurs from all walks of life. Yeah. It didn't state that we had to do that from a physical location. It just so happens that is the kind of path we've taken, and it's one that's worked for us in before. But it's also kind of we've also proven that we haven't necessarily had to operate Launch 22 as a physical space. We proved that through our incubator program, that we were able to kind of run programs and provide our services through that, which means we don't have to do it from a physical space. And we prove it very regularly with the mentoring. I mean, 80% of the mentoring that happens at the moment isn't actually from a physical space. It's from a coffee shop or a phone call or this or that. We're just the vehicle that connects those two together. So if we can kind of spend less time on one aspect, which is kind of managing a space, and more time on providing the mentoring opportunities or something like that, then I think that we'll be able to adapt and kind of come out more resilient. But you never know what's going to happen. I mean, I think a lot of businesses, like I said, are going to struggle massively at this time. And if this continues for, 3, 6, 12 months, a lot will fail. And like I said, again, I'm not putting us out of that. It's kind of just the honest kind of truth.
Yeah. I mean, honesty is, I think, the most important quality we all need now, and transparency. I think people are honest in the sense that they're credible in terms of integrity, but I think honesty has a different also face to that. Like, you're not telling a lie, but you don't have to be transparent in some situations, but you choose to be transparent type of.
Yeah. And we want to talk about all this stuff because, we want to show that, one, we're trying new things, but also that, like, to show that the businesses that we work with, for example, that, like, doesn't matter what business you're doing, there's definitely other avenues you can explore. And yeah, you might need to pivot your model and perhaps take a hit on your revenues, or lose an employee or two or whatever. But just we want to show that at least you should at least give it a go, rather than just roll over and take it. And which I think is completely goes against every kind of entrepreneurial kind of thought process.
It's quite difficult. Have you seen any good example? Good example. What I mean by good example is actually a startup that has seen an opportunity that was not there before, and that came amidst this crisis, and then actually started acting on that opportunity. Have you seen any examples, any ideas, any niches
I mean,
around
there's actually, so a couple of I think there's a couple of Launch 22 ones actually. So a
that? Okay.
couple of members are trying out a couple of new things. I'm due to have a catch up with all of our members throughout this week anyway, so I'll hopefully have more to share with you afterwards. But I think one is one of our founders, Vikesh, of Honestly Good Smoothies. He's actually seen an opportunity and is looking to take advantage of kind of the majority of people working from home, looking at kind of eating more healthily. And so he's kind of seeing an increase in his smoothie subscription boxes. So I think he's trying to capitalize on that kind of home living, healthy living set up there. So he hasn't necessarily pivoted his business so much, but he's kind of doubled down on what he's doing. There's also not Launch 22, but one of the kind of companies which we use as a third party booking platform for our space. It's called Hire Space. So we kind of have our venues on there. And they have actually created a list of or they've collated over all of the venues they've got on their sites, a list of all the spaces which are happy to volunteer their space up at this time for emergency hospitals or care centres or food points. And so they're actually pivoting in a kind of social way to capitalize on their asset, which is all of the spaces around London that are booked on there, and seeing if they can leverage those to support people in need at this time. And so I really like what they're doing there. Actually, that's really, really cool approach they're taking. There's a bunch of others, but they escape my mind right now.
I mean, very good examples. And I think this is especially what people need in terms of both inspiration, and there is some amped up energy. We cannot go out. Our normal business functioning cannot go on. I think that energy is that can be self-destructive if not put into the right venues. So actually creating something that can drive the business, help its growth is very valuable. And let me contribute to that with two examples of my own. So we do have a video learning business that I'm a co-founder of, which goes back to 3.5 years. Now we have actually seen almost like a 300% increase in the leads coming to that business over the last 2 weeks, which is because people are at home and many of them cannot go outside. Normal workshops are canceled. So large organizations are looking to that and saying, okay, how can I actually substitute that? And a way to do that is modern, high quality video learning. So that's an example. I mean, I think it's really good to copy what works. Another example is a good friend of mine. They are working in intelligent home automation systems. So they're essentially designing both the software and the hardware of those panels that go into these new homes. And with this new situation, they are working on a prototype of a ventilator, which is very cheap and easily accessible. And they actually are working with the government now and have had some orders because it's within their capability. So I think a very entrepreneurial thing is to look at, okay, what are my capabilities? What is my deck? What are the problems and what are the intersection areas, and thinking in a very open and broad way. So I think that was a very fruitful conversation, but I do have just one more question, and potentially if you have any other comments to add, please do add. So looking at the bigger ecosystem, and we know that ecosystems act and react differently than individual players, companies or people within them. So let's talk about the London startup ecosystem in terms of funding, the general bullish versus bearish situation, etc. So what are your predictions or thoughts about the future of the viability of building and becoming successful as a startup, as a founder in London in the coming year, for example?
Is that with reference to raising funding, or just more generally?
More generally, if you have comments on funding, I'd love to hear that. I think people are more conservative in that area. But
Yeah,
yeah,
well, I think
it's a more general question, not specific to funding.
I am, for want of a better word, I hope was optimistic at the worst of times. So I can't help but try and look at kind of the scenarios that we're kind of faced with, and then kind of try and think of the positives to take from that, or the silver linings. So I think a kind of an outcome of this virus is that a lot of people in business in general, in larger companies and corporates, will lose their jobs, or be put on gardening leave, or kind of be put on part-time work. And people will have a lot more free time as well as a result of that. I think business is slow if you're kind of not in a proactive kind of setup like some of the businesses we've just talked about. So people have more time on their hands, they've got more time to think, and I think there's going to be a slump. Not many funding rounds are going to be closed over the next 6 to 12 months. And we've seen that at launch. A bunch of the companies which are at our space are also looking to fundraise, and we're like midway through their raises, and as a result of this happening, they haven't been able to subsequently raise, and they've had to leave.
It's quite difficult.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. But then at the same time, yeah, there's more. Everyone will have a long kind of consolidatory period, which I think will, when things start returning to normal, have a kind of catalytical. No, I'm not sure how to do the word.
Catalystical, is that a word? I don't know.
I don't know what it is, but like that kind of spring back, with seeing a kind of a surge and kind of more ideas, I think, and more bootstrapped ideas, I think, as well.
I think that's spot on.
Because the funding will have dried up for the will dry up over the last 6 to 12 months, over the next 6 to 12 months, sorry, and it will eventually come back. But I think in that time, people will be forced to think more creatively about how they prove the concept of their business, and it's something which we've always promoted at Launch 22. Like a lot of people come to us kind of fixating on trying to raise funding, and then we kind of ask them first and foremost, like, what do you need that money for? Have you proven that there's a need in the market for what your product is? What are you selling? So I think we'll see some of those things happening. But yeah, so there'll be a lack of funding, which I think, and also a kind of people will have more time on their hands. So there'll be more bootstrapped ideas coming through, and hopefully that will kind of push things back up after 12 months or so. But I also see the same for co-working. Co-working is an interesting industry to look at right now, because a lot of companies will be taking big hits, and a lot of businesses will go out. A lot of co-working providers will go out of business. That's kind of, I think, completely
unavoidable to a certain extent.
Yeah, definitely unavoidable. But at the same time, I think what will happen in co-working is that you will get a huge amount of people working from home, practically everyone, which will change their kind of perspective on their kind of working life, and their kind of work-life balance, and going to the office, working from home, and it will show that they don't need to work from an office. But at the same time, when these bans are lifted, everybody will be desperate to get out of their homes. And so I think there'll also be a new kind of
workspace rush, is there?
I think
Co-working rush.
Well, it's obviously all speculative, but I think there may be something like that, and there'll be kind of people not wanting to go back to their traditional office,
Mhm,
and also big employers kind of realizing that they don't necessarily need to have their employees work from their office every day.
mhm.
There might be a surge in people looking at kind of co-working again. So I think there'll be a leveler in the market with this, and then I think there'll be a couple of providers which will kind of take, if they come through this, will actually do really well off the back of it and be a lot more resilient, which I think we haven't seen in co-working so much with the likes of WeWork and things like that.
Mhm. I mean, it's such a fascinating thing how indirect and so how chaotic some changes happen. While you were talking about this, it just reminded me. Imagine you're looking for a house 2 years, 3 years from now on. It's going to be a part of the natural conversation to assume that it has a home office within that.
Yeah,
So now it was like a side consideration.
yeah, no, like that.
While you were renting out, this was a conversation. Does it have an office that I could use, etc.?
Yeah,
Because, but now it's going to be the norm, which is quite curious, I find.
yeah, it's really interesting to see. Actually, I'm quite curious to see what develops.
Do you have anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
Who else have you been speaking to? Who else have you? What other perspectives have you got so far
So
on
you're actually the first of
come on.
these interviews. That's really good. But we have three coming up that have confirmed for this week, and I'm expecting replies from 5 other founders. So actually, what I've done with this is go back to the founders we featured in Startups of London and looked at the businesses which have unique insights in with COVID. For example, I think we're going to be having it. I had a confirmation from Anthony from Seed Legal. So he has a unique perspective because works with very businesses. So we're going to be talking about the funding angle. Hopefully I can get Philip from Forward Health, now Pando, because it's a health business. So his perspective I'm very curious about. So I'm trying to pick businesses. I have had a confirmation from Stasher, Jacob Wedderburn. So it's a travel business. It's been affected quite directly. So I'm curious about his perspective. So I think at the core of the matter is, Tom, we have to learn from each other. I mean, especially at times like this. And that was our ethos all along, going back to what we do out and create video documentaries and tour around London, which is not feasible anymore, obviously. But the core ethos is enable and facilitate people learning from each other. So that's we are trying to do what we are trying to do in a different way with this format and with this content actually. But to finish off, my comment would be this: thank you very much for your insights. I think they're very valuable. And who knows? Maybe it's gonna in the long run turn out for the better for maybe not in all dimensions, but in some dimensions. More bootstrap startups, startups focusing on early profitability, which is something that people always said mattered, but it was quite difficult to do because people were throwing money in your face where you can get very easy funding. Is quite difficult to do. So maybe there will be some silver linings, some positive ways how this change affects us in the long run. And I think it's our personal responsibility to at least increase the odds of those changes being positive by helping each other, helping the community, and facilitating learning. Thank you very much for being a part of this episode.
Lovely. No worries, Ozan. Good to chat to you, mate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Cheers, mate. Bye.